So I want to introduce Mari. She is a familiar face to many of you, I'm sure. And it's a welcome and a welcome back to Mari here. So I have a little bio that I'll share and then I'll turn it right over to her. So Marion Carpenter has over 20 years of experience in museum curation, collections, and exhibitions. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts in History and Afro-American Studies from Indiana University and a Master of Arts in American History with concentration in African American History from the University of Cincinnati. Marion was the former Associate Director of Collections at the Ringling, which is why she may be familiar to many of you. And currently she is the Director of Interpretation and Historical Research at the Conner Prairie Living History Museum in Fishers, Indiana. So Mari, thank you so much for coming back to join us for this wonderful talk today. And what I want to do, Mari, is just have you maybe speak a little bit about the genesis of this exhibition. How did the show come about? Whose idea was it? How did you select Gilliam? And as you're talking, I will share my screen and share some exhibition images so people can get a sense of the show as you're sort of talking through its origin.
Sounds wonderful. So thank you everyone for taking the time out to learn a little bit more about Gilliam and his wonderful works. And just to let you know, and then I know that probably Stephen's going to pop in any minute, so I'm going to give him some breathing room when he does get in. But I just want to let you guys know that, I'm going to let her get started. Really, to be honest with you, Stephen had been talking to various folks, particularly people in the community, as well as board members, to talk about what we could do in this gallery space. And it started to think about like a local collector show. We wanted to think about something dealing with African-American art, but we didn't know what that was going to transcend to. We had a wonderful board member, Warren Colbert, and he was really, really excited about Gilliam. And so some of the things that Stephen and Warren were looking through, like they were thinking about doing an African-American show, predominantly looking at modern art. A lot of the pieces really started when they were looking at different collectors. A lot of people had Gilliam in their collection. So with that said, Stephen and Warren started to look at maybe we should do something that honors Sam Gilliam. Sam Gilliam, if you guys don't know, that he is still a hardworking artist. I mean, he is jamming. And so he is actually next year is doing a retrospective of his entire work at the Hirshhorn Museum at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And so he is very much still on the scene, still very vibrant. And so we thought it would be great to just have a preview of some of his works that before his large show. So that's how it came about. I know that Stephen would probably add more to it because I wasn't in those initial conversations of the thought of it would be Gilliam. One of the things that probably Laura will ask me, but I was doing a dual role as associate director of collections. I was just trying to make sure we had that gallery space targeted and filled with an exhibition, and then looking at the budget. So I was really on that, like waiting for Stephen to say go. And I was like, okay, now we know that this gallery is going to be populated. Now what's the next step? So really the conversation was between Warren and Stephen with those thoughts. And as soon as that became to fruition and confirmed, that's when Warren started to reach out to local collectors and many of his friends to see if they would be interested in having their works on loan to the Ringling Museum. At the time, we didn't know how long the duration of the show was going to be. So it's a lot to ask a person who has those beautiful pieces in their living room or other places in their home to say, do you mind if we borrow your piece? It could be 3 months, it could be 6 months. And so with that said, we did come up with a host of lenders that were anxious to help us. And so I was really appreciative of that. I think it was about 9 lenders. And so with that said, once we got people kind of committed to it, that's how it started to kind of come to an exhibition. And then I could actually name, well, we didn't have the name at that point, but I could actually pinpoint that gallery and get my staff or my department to get prepared for an exhibition that would be running from the time period, what was it, February to August. So so did I answer the question?
Yes, thank you, Mari. So you talked about your role was assistant director of collections, chief registrar. So how did you get brought on as a co-curator? How was that different than your previous engagement with exhibitions? And what was that process like for you to be asked to curate something like this in conjunction with Stephen, our director?
Well, it's kind of hard to say no to your boss, right?
Fair point.
I mean, Stephen was very, encouraging, and it was a really great working experience because it was, I tell you, I wish that he was here to kind of balance this out, but it was a different work style. He approached me and asked if I would be interested in helping to co-curate this exhibition with him, giving my history dealing with the civil rights movement. So I know it was a very brief bio, but I used to work at the National Civil Rights Museum. So I did a lot of civil rights history, and I love jazz. Big fan, Thelonious Monk, John Coltrane. In fact, when I was getting ready for this exhibition, I was listening to some jazz, loving it. Miles Davis, loving it. And so Stephen asked if I would be willing to take on this additional responsibility, and I thought it was an honor. I have curated exhibitions mainly in history museums, but this was my first actual curation at an art museum because my background is really into history and collections of that sort. And so I was honored to stretch my experience and stretch myself as growing as a professional to see, hey, can I do this? And so that was really interesting, but it was really an honor, a lot of work, balancing it out, because as I mentioned before, as the Associate Director of Collections, I really don't get into the details of the exhibition. The responsibility is really to make sure that I disseminate that information to the registration, because let me step back. My responsibility was over registration, prep and design, and conservation. And so those teams would actually coordinate all of the objects and the artwork that was coming in and fabricating the gallery, or making sure the care or the condition reporting of the artwork. So I wasn't stepping to that degree with the exhibitions. My main responsibility was to make sure that we could schedule the gallery, make sure that we had insurance, the budget, and to make sure the scheduling didn't overlap so much with other exhibitions, because we had multiple exhibitions. You guys probably know this as you walk through the Ringling. There's so many galleries, and we have different schedules that we have to maintain, that I maintain when an exhibition closed or open. And so there's a lot of planning that goes behind that. So even though you might see it opening, we would probably be planning a year in advance before that opening. So I had to make sure all of that was going on. So it was different. Stepping into the curatorial role, even though I've worked closely with curators to make sure that we got things that they definitely needed. But now I was stepping on that side of that wall, so to speak. So it was interesting to take on that. But yes, I was appreciative that Stephen thought to invite me onto the project and to have me share my civil rights history background as well as my love for jazz. And so that's why I infused a lot of the information into the installation as well as the chats that we wrote.
Thanks, Mari. So can you talk a little bit more about that? How these two interests that you have in civil rights history and in jazz come together in Gilliam's work, and where you see that, and how, how that's conveyed in the exhibition?
Yes, really, and I hope that you all did pick up. There was a brochure, which I have it. Like this little brochure, right? There was a brochure that really was in the gallery that talked extensively about Gilliam, how he got started. And one of the things is that he's still working in DC, but when he landed in DC, he was really involved with some of the civil rights activities there. He was very much at the, basically seeing it for firsthand, living in DC in the 1960s. So he was very much involved, even though he, if you do some research on Gilliam, you may not see his, like he wasn't like a very bold activist in the sense that he was seen everywhere, but his work speaks for itself. And so with the civil rights movement, you cannot think about Sam Gilliam without talking about the civil rights movement, because that's the time period he was working in, as well as he was born and raised in Tupelo, Mississippi. He went to school in Louisville, Kentucky. And so there, at this time, this is in the 1950s and 60s. So there's a lot of activism and a lot of the civil rights movements at its height at that time period. So he was experiencing something in his personal life as well as in his professional career. So he wanted to infuse that in his works, and he's looking at different things that are going on. Even though we didn't have some of those pieces in there, but he did a series. It really impacted him with the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So he did a series really talking and expressing himself when he was assassinated on April 4th, 1968. So he normally is not politically like statement wise, but he did want to acknowledge that because the riots and the things that were happening, the reaction to King's assassination was in a lot of major cities, not only just in Memphis, but in DC and a lot of other major cities. And so with my connection with the National Civil Rights Museum, I worked there for many years, and looking at that, I was able to make those correlations with Sam Gilliam and to understand some of the things that he might wanted that he was expressing in his artwork. And then at the same time, he talks, if you do listen and do some research on, which is really groovy, he worked musically when he was producing some of his works. He used jazz as a way to kind of connect. And this thought of jazz as improvisation, I can get into some musical terminology there because it's really kind of really, it speaks to Gilliam's expression of how he wanted to just really burst down any kind of constraints. And so I know Stephen would talk about, because he did really do a lot of research on his straight pieces, how this became really a signature piece for Gilliam because he wanted no constraints. With a canvas, you are kind of locked in. And so he wanted to break those boundaries. And in jazz and improvisation, you can, go out on a limb per se. And so if you listen to Miles Davis or John Coltrane, they do not allow the boundaries of music, and they're always reinventing themselves. And that's what Sam Gilliam was doing as he's looking at these earlier pieces in his career. And then of course, we have it from the 1970s to the 2010. That's the stretch of the scope of the exhibit. But for the short period of, I know I kind of rambled on with the question you asked me, but because I get very passionate, I think that's why with Steve was here to balance it out, because I could talk about jazz all day long. because that's the way I pictured the exhibition, because Stephen came from a perspective of looking at art. And I told Stephen when he asked me to be a co-curator with him, I said, my degree is not in art. I appreciate art, but I can dig it with history and the civil rights movement and jazz. And he says, that's the balance that we need. So that's where I really kind of, Sam Gilliam spoke to me.
Great, thanks, Mari. And Stephen has been able to join us now. So
good.
Thanks, Stephen, for hopping on.
Hey, I'm not late, am I?
Well, just a little, but that's okay. We'll forgive it.
Oh, I had on my calendar that it started a while ago. I mean, that it started at 11. So sorry.
Oh, no problem at all. We just
interviewing candidates. Hey, I've got to somehow move this view here. I'm sorry. So that I'm looking at you and not looking sideways.
So Stephen, while you're getting situated, Mari, I'm going to ask you a question that was conveyed in the chat from Ingrid that kind of goes along with what you were talking about with his styles and his working practice. So Ingrid is asking, the different images we're showing here show the variety of styles and media in which the artist works. Did he create the variety simultaneously, or does he sort of evolve and move through different styles and media over time? So Mari or Stephen, either of you can take that question if you'd like.
I would say over time, but I'm going to turn it over to Stephen since.
Yeah. I mean, the wonderful thing about Gilliam is that he keeps coming back to things that he develops both very early in his career. I mean, the drape paintings are a great example of that. He comes back to that. He's still doing those works, but he continues to build and innovate and change along the way. And so you see in, these cut up works that he was doing in, the early part, late 90s and early into the 2000s, that were sort of connecting back to the past. But then in the 90s, he started working with plywood and painting on plywood and playing around and making these really sort of wonderful works that, there's a good example of one right there, Green Wave, very complex. But yet he still maintains that sense that it always has to be changing and that has to be flexible. So he put in this piano hinge to create that kind of sense that piece will always be different every time you look at it, because that hinge is going to change and you're going to get a hint of the red behind it. And so it allows some degree of play. So I think that's one of the things that, for me, I really love about his work is this consistency of innovation and on always changing, always exploring, but at the same time never forgetting where he's come from and the things that he's done to get to this point.
So Stephen and Mari, as curators, is it up to your discretion then when pieces are somewhat malleable? For example, this hinge here or some of the drape paintings, does the artist dictate how that should be displayed, or does it just depend on the person displaying the work of art?
Well, do you want to say it, Stephen?
Well, no, I don't want to. This is the problem with Mari and I, because we'll both talk at the same time.
Yes.
So Mari, you take it on, and then I'll follow up with whatever.
See, this is why we collaborate so good. I was just going to say is that just like Stephen mentioned about innovation, but as I was talking about improvisation, Sam did not want the pieces to be hung the same way every time they're exhibited. And so you can see it in the drape pieces that are on the, I don't know if we've got another slide on that, but it shows that it was in one of the lenders' home. Yeah, there you go. One of the lenders' home. And so we did altered it a little bit. But it was meant to say, you know, that freedom of an expression of improvisation, that jazz connection that Gilliam has. So I would say is that it's really, and we had the lender there too to help out. But I would say is it depends on the piece, and also in the spirit of Sam Gilliam's thoughts of not having things done the same way. Did I connect that right, Stephen?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and so the fun is installing, because we get to play around with it. That installing those two drape pieces, we actually had the lender with us, and we were able to really play around with the light and the shadows and that, and to bring out certain colors that would have been, you know, in another iteration would have been hidden. And so as installing the work, it's just a lot of fun. I will say that the hinge piece is a bit of an issue, because every time I go in there, it's in a different spot, and it's not from my decision or Mari's decision. So the audience, though we wish they wouldn't, and we hope our security guards protect that, but from time to time, someone helps out and makes it a little more, makes it more to their liking. But yeah, that's also a fun part about these pieces, is that they each piece as an individual pretty much evolves over time.
So I want to pick up on this thread of having fun in the galleries. As the audience knows, this curating project is sort of outside the realm of both of your day-to-day duties. So this was a special project that you got to take on. Can you talk us through the process of curating a show? You know, you get all the objects, you select them, you hang them, but what is that process like? And especially when you're collaborating as co-curators, can you just kind of talk us through how this all came to fruition?
Well, I'll start. I mean, I was a curator for 12 years in contemporary art, both national and international work, and I've never given up being a curator. I still retain the authority to act and do a project from now and then. So I usually try to do one project a year of one sort, like the Ai Weiwei projects we did a couple of years ago. So for me, it's just, that's why I got into this business. This is what I love about museums, is working with artists and working with installations and such. But the process for this was interesting, because it all happened around COVID, and we set out to look at collectors of African-American art in the Sarasota region, and to look toward building an exhibition that could showcase the wealth of African-American art in our community. And so, but we just got started on that when COVID hit. And so we couldn't go to anybody's home. We couldn't really look at work and couldn't explore. One of our board members, Warren Colbert, was sort of opening doors to us, to different collectors that he was knowledgeable of. And so, but you know, they wouldn't let us in. So we sort of were going to delay this, but then I knew of several collectors that had Gilliam's work, and Warren had mentioned that he'd come across a number of Gilliam pieces in his visits. And so we said, well, let's see if we can identify enough work that we can actually do a Gilliam show. And we knew that the Hirshhorn was having one next year. And so it'd be a wonderful sort of precursor to the Hirshhorn show to do one from local collections here. So, and then at the same time, I didn't want to curate this project myself. And I had this wonderful associate director of collections, who is a historian, African-American historian, and brought a whole different set of skills to the mix. And so I asked if she would join me in jurying this show, and Marion did. And so Marion, take it from there.
Yeah, and so that's what I was letting you all know. I did a pretty good job because before Stephen, you weren't here, so I was kind of giving that kind of background, but you guys heard it from Stephen. So, but yes, it was a wonderful opportunity. And like I said earlier, it was a way for me to stretch my professional growth. I had, like Stephen, I've been in the business for a minute, but mostly behind the scenes. And the shows I had curated was mainly dealing with history, African-American history. And I dealt with objects, not so much art work, but objects. And so it was very different for me because I know you guys know that historians are very long-winded. You've never seen a history book that's not more than like 200 pages, right? So that was my training. So it was a really different way of reviewing and looking at an exhibition. And so Stephen was helping me to monitor that because I was like, how many words should I write? So I was like, okay, I'm not an art historian, so you're gonna have to help me on some of these things. And one of the things that I really enjoyed taking on this project, it was just listening to Stephen and how he was reviewing looking at the artwork. And that inspired me to see the history and to understand the time period that Sam was producing his works. And I was just thinking, what was he thinking about? What was he going through? And so some of the early works, and that's why I was pushing Stephen, we got to get the early works in the 1970s, because I like the 1970s. And so I really connected that with the Black arts movement of the 1970s. And that was a really time period of a lot of change and political activism and speaking out. And Sam did that with his work. And, so I really wanted to connect that energy that was happening during that time period. So that's where I kind of took it from. And it was a very interesting collaboration. And then also at that point in time, he was my boss. But then when we were like co-curating, it was a different work environment. So it's sort of like, he was like, hey, can you look at them? Like, it's my boss. Okay, I'll go. But then we was like, no, Mari, I want to get your opinion. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So it was just a different way of working that we had before.
Did you talk about how we actually narrowed down the list?
Oh, that was interesting. Well, at the time, as Stephen said, it was COVID. I was actually in Indiana, which I'm in now. I'm here in Indiana, Fishers, Indiana. I was actually going back and forth during that time period for a family matter. And so actually, I was not in Sarasota when Stephen says, hey, we got all this work. And we were looking at it from like these thumbnails, images. And I was like, okay. And so it was really kind of fun, but I don't know how he pulled it off. But he laid all of these copies in our library. And he took his phone. This is the only way we could connect. He took his phone and says, Mari, can you see this? And I'm like, yeah, well, slow down. And we were looking at it that way. So that's how we start selecting and eliminating, because I was working from Indiana for like, I think it was about a month and a half, various times. And so that was one of the times I was in Indiana. So it was definitely probably not the most, the way you would do it to select works, but we had to look at these images. And so Steve, I know you're going to say something, but it was interesting because when we actually saw the works, like, damn, they're really good. It looks really great. Yeah. Because some of the pictures weren't really clear.
They were awful.
Real nice about it.
They were terrible. In fact, we gave all the donors a high definition photograph of their work so that they don't do this to other curators in the future. Because what we got were not really good reproductions of the work. And we had to, some things, it's not a way to curate a show, honestly. But during times of COVID, when we're locked in and we can't do these things, you have to adapt. And so that's what we did. And we kind of crossed our fingers on a couple of pieces, particularly the piece that is the title piece on the title wall. The picture we had was out of what distorted, and then also had a big piece of paper on top of it saying what the title was. So we could only see sort of a bit of the painting. And it was really hard to tell what we were going to get. And when it showed up, it is just a fantastic piece. And we immediately changed our plans for the installation because it was such a strong work that we put it right on the title wall. But until we unwrapped it, we had no idea what it was going to be. And so yeah, that was an unusual curating job. And then having Marion in Indianapolis just made it that much more fun.
And then also I would add is that some of the works, we were bringing them from other places. So just like Stephen said, it was almost like Christmas Day. You didn't know what you were getting but until you got them there. And then some of the sizes that they told us was not correct.
Yeah,
so we
right.
were trying to, we had this layout and we were working with our chief preparator, Keith Crawley, and he was trying to lay it out. And each time he's like, okay, that's not going to work there because the size was different. Or when we went to pack the pieces up in the lenders that were in Sarasota, we were like, wow, this is smaller than we thought. So that was, and so we had to just be flexible.
Yeah.
So thinking about, this unboxing of artwork and seeing it for the first time in person, what, if anything, I know there were some surprises about size, but were you able to sort of pick your favorite? And I know it's hard to say you have a favorite of a really strong and beautiful show, but do each of you have a favorite work of art that really kind of surprised you, or something that you weren't expecting to be so drawn to?
Well, I have to say, I just love Green Wave and that painting. I had seen that painting before because I knew the collector of that work, but seeing it in the gallery and just getting up close to it and looking at the texture and the color, and it's just, I think it's just a really beautiful example of his work at that period of time. Very different from previous work and later work, but that I think is just a really phenomenal piece for his work in the mid-90s.
I would say I'm still in the 90s too. It's Quattro. And I telling you, Laura, the funny story, so I'll tell it. So, because I can say it now. There was a time, and I know Stephen will remember this, he got really excited and said, hey, it was on a Friday evening and I was tired. And he says, hey, let's go into the vault and look at these pieces. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just had a whirl of things to do. And so he said, let's go and look at him. And we put him in, hung him out in the vault. And one of the pieces was Quattro that we were looking at. And we got really up close and personal to it. And I really started looking at it. And Stephen's fashion was like, oh, I'm done. Let's go. And I'm like, I'm still hung up on this. And I was like, okay. So that was when we were deciding what pieces to write on for the chats. That was one of the things that I really got excited about was Quattro because of Sam Gilliam's response to African-American quilting. And I really looked at the way, and I had some experience with dealing with crazy quilts. And it also spoke to that jazz improvisation. And so that was one of the pieces that I really enjoyed. And I know Itchy is similar to that piece. So we kind of, had it kind of speaking to each other, but Quattro was the one that drew me in more than any of the pieces, even though I wanted the the pieces in the 70s to really kind of speak to me. I think that one, because Stephen had that late night saying, let's go into the vault and see it. And I saw it. So.
Well, and Ichi and Quattro were from two different collectors, and when we brought them in, we didn't realize they were from the same series that Gilliam had done, and so then we were able to figure that out, and so that was pretty interesting as well. So they were using the same techniques, and they're all unique. Those are both unique pieces, and that being able to showcase them there together was really terrific. We have them opposite one another, so that they're kind of looking at each other as opposed to being side by side.
So let's talk a little bit more about collectors. I think it's probably something very unique to the arts community in Sarasota that we had such a robust show that you were able to call just from local collectors. So Stephen, can you talk a little bit about how the art scene has changed since you first came to Sarasota and how you sort of envision working with local collectors moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, the museum hasn't traditionally, I mean, when I came, the museum had not been really showing contemporary art for about 20 years. And so it was we really hadn't added much work to the collection that was contemporary until we added the James Turrell Sky Space. And that was underway when I came, but I had the honor of being able to work with Turrell and in the final stages of its installation, and since it opened 10 years ago. So then so for the museum, it's a total change because we really hadn't been doing a lot of work in that arena. I know there were probably projects over those times, but not a concentrated effort. So we've put together over about 15,000 square feet of gallery space now. And I'm hoping to add another 10,000 of square feet in an addition at the Searing Wing to expand the contemporary art permanent collection display, because we're really working hard now to fill in all the areas where, well, one where there was mostly white male painters in the collection, and we're seeking out works by African American and Hispanic artists and more women artists as well, so that we can tell a fuller story of the past, from the 40s and 50s to the present day. So for internally, that's been happening. And then if you look at it citywide, you have the Sarasota Art Museum that just recently opened. That's a wonderful addition to our community. Their focuses will be on more cutting edge contemporary work, which we do as well. But you can't have, from my opinion, you can't have enough of it. And so that's a great addition. I have been particularly pleased with the Sarasota, I'm blanking the name here, Art Center Sarasota, right downtown. They've had some good leadership there and some good installations going on there as well. So, and yeah, I think there was just a chat that we have the Highwaymen at Selby Gardens. So there's an institutional change that has occurred. Gallery wise, it is a little different. Alan Gallup Gallery was one that I worked with quite a bit when Alan was alive, and actually we just are working on an acquisition from Sheila Moore, who's been running the Alan Gallup Gallery. But those some of those major galleries that were downtown seem to have disappeared somewhat. So and then of course Ringling College, not only the Sarasota Art Museum, but their galleries on campus are really wonderful to showcase the artists both at the school, but also curated exhibitions as well. Again, Ringling College is developing a great group of artists, and some of those will stay, and some of those will help build the art scene here in our community. And I think that's terrific as well.
Wonderful, thank you. So I want to open it up to audience questions, but before we do, I have one final question for the two of you, which is, how do you hope that visitors will experience the exhibition? What do you want the takeaway to be from someone after they spend some time in that show?
You first, Marion.
Well, I think I said it earlier. If you can get a chance to view the exhibit through the lens of jazz, because I think that gives the honor and the spirit of what Sam Gilliam was producing a lot of the works, because he did use jazz. He worked when he was producing a lot of his work, he was listening to jazz. So I would suggest you listening to some Coltrane and some Miles Davis, get another perspective. But also just thinking about the time period that we cover into the gallery, and think about those events that are happening. Just like we were talking about some of the pieces that are set when we talk about destiny. That was one of the pieces that Steve and I looked at differently, but then I thought about, the year that was produced. And he was looking at, that was the first, when we had our first African-American president, Barack Obama. And so I just wanted for people to walk away with looking at the time periods that he made his works, but also influence of jazz and improvisation, and just like Stephen said, innovation. And I think you will enjoy and see a lot. And each time you go into the gallery, you'll see something different, because I know I always did.
Well, I was going to bring up the jazz from the State College of Florida. They did a project here, and I see Laura already gave you the link, but they did a project here. They were so enthusiastic with the exhibition that they basically selected a few works to build compositions around. They're really beautiful, and I really encourage you to download them on your phone and listen to them while you're going around the gallery, because they're compositions dedicated to specific works, and I think that'll help you sort of embrace that connection between music and the visual arts.
Great, thank you both. I want to open it now to audience questions or comments. We did have one question from John in the chat. I assume to you, Stephen, since Mari, you're no longer in Sarasota, but have you seen the Robert Colescott exhibit at the Sarasota Art Museum?
No, I haven't yet, but I did a Colescott exhibition in Savannah right before I came here. And so I'm very familiar with a number of the works in the show, but I am going. I've been traveling, and so I really haven't gotten over there, but it's definitely on my list to see, because I know this is a more comprehensive look at his work, and it has a different lens that it's looking at as the theme to the exhibition. And so I am really looking forward to seeing it. And Colescott is just fantastic, a fantastic artist. My project happened, it was probably the first show of his work after he passed away. And so it was, for me, it was particularly moving to be able to showcase that work. But yeah, I think it's great to see it here, and I compliment them for pulling it together, because it is, it's really hard to get access to these works now. They've become very, very valuable and are under a lot of demand. So good job.
Any other comments or questions for our two curators here? Feel free if you'd like to just unmute, if that's easier, feel free to do that. Yeah, Mary, go ahead.
I really enjoyed the exhibit. Thank you. I'm wondering if there have been any efforts to draw more visitors from the African-American community, given this particular exhibit, or particularly our young people. Are there any plans to kind of encourage more visitors?
Yeah, well, we've had a number of sort of events around this to draw people in, particularly within the African American community, and they've been pretty successful in drawing people in. Unfortunately, the show kind of opened after school, and we weren't because still we were in COVID protocol, we weren't able to bring school kids in. And it closes in mid-August, which is, I think, is too early to bring in kids, when they come back to school, because we have this really strong school tour program here that Laura and her team manage, and this would be a perfect show for them. And so but timing wise, it just didn't work out there. But
I'll jump in and say though, Stephen, we have
Yeah.
been incorporating pieces from the Gilliam show into our virtual school tour program. So we've used it on our homeschool day and on school tours across the country. So we have been able to expose students that way.
Great.
Stephen, if I could add also, we created a really nice YouTube video, which is a kind of a short promo of the exhibition as well. And we highly, and it's easy to share with the public. So we would encourage you to take a look at that. You can easily copy that link and paste it in the email or attach it to a text message to your colleagues or your friends all over the country and share it that way. So we'd appreciate if you do that as well too. But it's a really nice kind of promo video. Something new that we started for our, through our marketing department, trying to promote our exhibitions and give the public a little bit easier access. Not the entire exhibition, just a little bit of a snippet, just to entice you to come. So,
yeah, thanks, Mark. That's a great point. So please go online. You can download it, and particularly please share, because this shows up for another month, and we would love to have everyone who is in town here and wants to see it to be able to see it. So the more word is out, the better. We have been advertising the project in local newspapers, and so trying to get the word out on the Gilliam. But we also have a Saito Kyoshi exhibition that's going on, and a number of other projects. So we kind of have to distribute our marketing funds fairly between these different artists, like Skyways too, that just opened. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mari, and thank you, Stephen, for putting together this fabulous exhibition and taking the time to walk us through your process today. This was a really wonderful insight into how you collaborated.